Well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. This is an Adoption UK webinar on a Monday morning with the fantastic Helen Oakwater joining us today once again to share her knowledge, wisdom, and maybe answer a few questions and help us along in our journey. So fantastic to see you, Helen. If I can draw everyone's attention to the fact that as a webinar, we can't see you, I'm afraid. We can only hear you when we kind of have some questions in and allow you to speak. We can't normally hear you speaking, but if you do have any questions that we need to discuss, please file them in the Q&A button. If you do the wee groovy mouse wiggle, you'll see at the bottom of your screen the Q&A and you'll see the chat function. Some of you have used the chat function already this morning, which is great. If you have any questions, please use preferably the Q&A, but also the chat function also. And with a bit of luck, we'll get through as many questions as we possibly can at the end of Helen's presentation. I'm going to disappear off the screen, but I'm going to be lurking in the background. So I've not gone too far. And with no further ado, oh, sorry, Helen.
Sorry, can I just clarify?
Yes.
40 minutes and then questions?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, the length of the webinar lasts around an hour, but okay, if you're okay to maybe go 5 minutes over if we need to.
I will go on as long as you would like me to.
Okay. Don't say that. We'll be here until tea time.
That's fine.
Okay, right. I'm going to go away and I'm going to leave you to it, Helen.
Thank you. Simon, you are in charge of the logistics.
Oh, well, I'll try my best.
Okay. Right, everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar. We've had a few little hiccups at the beginning, and it's going to be one of those sessions. I couldn't print my slides off, so if I keep looking down, it's because I have my laptop here, which has the presentation on, so I know what's coming next. Okay, a little bit about me. Some of you may know me. I'm an adopter. I adopted a sibling group back in the early 90s, a sibling group of 3. I'm also now a coach, a trainer. I was a full-time parent. I've held various roles in Adoption UK, including being a trustee. I ran a local group for a decade or so, and I've sat on 2 local authority adoption panels and was on the government task force back in the day under Tony Blair. So I have quite a diverse background, and I've been down there in the dirt, so I know what it's like. My understanding is that you are a complete cross-section of people, so I'm going to assume that on one level you know nothing, on another level there are some of you here with masses of knowledge, and I hope that I will add to that. So bear with, why is, okay, I don't seem to be able to. Oh, this is clear. This is very interesting. The arrows for moving forward. Right, I'm going to come out of this.
You know, this is the 3rd thing, Helen, that's gone on this morning. So it comes in 3s. So this is it.
I can't seem to.
Is it not moving forward?
To move on to the next slide. Okay, hang on. What's happening here? Right, escape's not working. Goodness me.
Would you like me to stop sharing your screen?
I think you're going to have to, because my eyes appear to be locked, or it's just not moving on. Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. Oh, now we've got it. Hang on. I don't know.
Okay, let's hope it's not caught up and it's just going to click on about 73 times.
Right, okay, okay, that's it. Now this is, I have no idea what's happening here. Again, I apologize, folks, but you know what? If you are an adopter, you learn behavioral flexibility. You learn to weave in and out, because things are not always what you expect, how you expect, and things go wrong and you have to go, oh, that's interesting. Step back, have a different perspective. Humor is always useful because that helps you keep grounded and get a perspective. Okay, so some of you, I am like Marmite. Some people love me, some hate me. And that's because I do truth telling. And sometimes people find that truth a bit harsh or a bit shocking. However, I also know that for many people, it confirms their reality. And I say things in a way that maybe other people don't, because I am no longer attached to any organization, so I can be very straightforward. And my whole approach is, what do I wish I'd known before I started my journey? What do I wish I'd known at various stages on the journey? My approach is, I'm a learner, I'm curious, holistic, various fields. There is no one size fits all for anything, in my opinion. And so bring pragmatic. This slide is about knowledge, in my view, and I would say that my knowledge is up at the top, and down at the bottom are the green pillars of research. And research is great, and you have to see research in breadth as well as depth. And sometimes people get very hung up on one small detail inside the piece of research. Kind of go, oh, that's it, it's the solution. I know I've done that myself, and I've stepped back now and gone, you know what, it's not. We have to have a breadth and a depth of knowledge. Yes, we move around, and the important thing is to join the dots, and each of us join the dots in a very different way. So to manage your expectations today, the agenda, bit of pre-framing. I'm going to talk about my assumptions about you. We're going to go through a number of models and applications of some of the concepts and the implication of that. And the whole thing today is around, what is it to have a full and rich life? So this webinar, unlike the previous one I did, is more focused on you as a parent, and the journey that you may need to take as part of the journey to stretch yourself. In the previous journey, the previous webinar, I covered these things here. That is available on the Adoption UK website for those of you that are members, and it is also available on my YouTube channel. So some of the assumptions I've made about the material I'm delivering today are that if you don't already know it, go back and have a look at that. So, managing your expectations, what I assume you already know. I assume that you know about attachment. I assume you know about the models of attachment, the different styles, types, that you know about trauma, you know about developmental trauma, which is what many of our children have experienced because they had a disrupted start in life. And I use the metaphor of shrapnel for explaining the sorts of trauma. And that wall there is the wall of needs. And many of our children had poor experiences as far as their developmental needs were concerned. And those are gaps that we have to fill, and that we have to understand that. The first model that I want to share with you is the universal cycle of change. And this is a model that's come from Chris Halbom of the NLP, based in California. She is an international trainer of NLP, and I've been privileged to be trained by her. And she talks about the universal cycle of change and how it is similar to a deciduous tree. So we have creation, new beginnings, then growth and expansion, then complexity to maturity. And if you think that's when that tree looks absolutely gorgeous in summer, as it probably does now, then turbulence comes along. that's like the autumny bit. And then the chaos and the release and the dropping off for a tree that then becomes dormant. Now, we can map that across to human development and human growth. And as Chris says, we are the only things that often don't follow this universal cycle of change. So we could think about an issue, and let's say it's something like infertility, which may be a challenge for some of you. It was for me. And I know that stepping back, I was thinking, what did I want? And I wanted to be a parent. And then actually, I had to not follow the normal path. So started to go from complexity to maturity. And then the problems came along and I got feedback from the environment. And in that place of turbulence is the choice point. Do you change and shift to the next level, or do you advance to chaos? Now, for many of us with infertility, we get stuck in that place. And what we actually need to do is to move into chaos. And chaos is painful. Chaos is the time when we can't hold it all together and things and we start falling apart. And we cry and we sob and we say, why me? It's not fair. And actually, what we have to do is really get connected to that and step back and say, what do we need to release? What do I need to let go of so that I can move forward? What are the beliefs that I have? What are the emotions that I have? What do I need to do to release this, to get to a place of meditation and dormancy? And that's the time that we think, wow, that was really tough, and I just need to process that. Now, with infertility, in my case, I went, okay, infertile, no kids. I started a new career. I went to work at the stock exchange, and after a few years, I just kind of went, oh, you know what? I think I do want kids. And I've come to terms at this stage with my infertility. So let's start exploring what might be the next stage. This is a process that applies throughout life and is really useful. What are your expectations through time? When we first start our adoption journey, we have our fantasy child. And then we start learning and we start thinking, oh, well, maybe not, maybe not, maybe not. One of the things we need to manage is what are our expectations through time? What do we expect a toddler to be like? What do we expect in the early years? What if we think they'll be like in early adolescence? What when they're a young adult? And for those of you who are already parents, the stage that your child is at now is probably not what you expected it to be a year ago. So you maybe need to step back and think, I wonder what they might be like in early adolescence or late adolescence. And if that is a horrifying thought, maybe you need to think about what do you need to let go of in the state of turbulence, because your expectations may not be being met. And if you are at the, well, you know, yeah, there are a few problems now, but it'll all sort out because I love them a lot and I'm just going to not listen to what other people are saying, then you need to drop off some of those thoughts, beliefs, so that you can get real with what's going on. when you take on a child, you could think that maybe it's like taking on a car. And this is where, for some people, my way of doing things can be perceived to be a bit challenging. How dare you talk about children like they're a car? It's a metaphor. And it's a metaphor that, in my experience, is useful for people. What sort of car might we be taking on? A nice shiny new car? Or is it a second-hand car? Or a third-hand car, or a fourth-hand car? What's happened to that car? This is where a useful exercise comes in, which is a timeline exercise, and you can think about it, or you can actually walk it out on the floor, which is what I've certainly done. I did a presentation at a conference for an Adoption UK workshop, and I had everybody in the room doing this exercise, where you take what you have from now and you walk it down the timeline and see what it's like in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years' time. And then turn around and come back and start picking up those learnings. And you can do this with a number of different ways of thinking. You could do it as the dreamer, the optimist, and say, yeah, it's all going to be fine. And I'll walk along and this is the experience I have. You know, maybe that's line F. Everything is perfect and it's going to be great and that's fine. And you walk down and you learn and you experience. Then try it again, shake it off, walk away, go, okay, that was useful. And then try it again with, well, what if actually the behavior doesn't change? What would that be like in 5 years' time? What would that like in 10 years' time? 20, 25? What would that be like? And walk down that timeline, getting those learnings, and then turn around and come back because you're absorbing those learnings into you. And then you could do it again, and you could do it as the worst case scenario and walk down the worst case scenario 10, 15, 20 years' time. What will be happening with the child? What will be happening with you? How will you look, feel, sound? Will you even be alive? And walk back down the timeline with those learnings. And when you get back to now, having done this a number of times with a number of different scenarios, you can step back and say, I've now got some wisdom, I've got some learning. There's some scary stuff ahead if things don't go the way I hope they will go. And for many of us, we thought that love was enough, and we know it's not. We know that our children have been very hurt and damaged before they get to us very often. And actually, what would it be like if your 4-year-old, who is quite violent and stroppy now, is still violent at the age of 16? And we know that child-on-parent violence is a real thing. It now has a name. And Twitter's allowed us to get a lot more knowledge about it because we can be anonymous. So that is a really good example, a concept that you can use to empower yourself. And when you think, okay, if I mix that with the universal cycle of change, what do I need to drop off? Do I need to drop off this eternal optimism? Oh, it'll all be fine. The answer is yes, you do. You need to look at your expectations through the trauma lens. And the lens of trauma gives us a very different perspective when we start understanding how trauma is stored in the body, how trauma needs resolution, healing, therapeutic input. Think what that is like. Trauma does not just melt on its own. It needs help, and it's unconscious, and it gets triggered. So if you think for a moment, here we have three, not identical, but similar cars. Would you want car A, B, or C? If you were at the stage of thinking about matching, what do you think you're getting? And you know what? It might be that you're actually getting car A that's had a really good clean and a good polish and suddenly looks very different. Maybe car A is what represents the child when the child was within the birth family experiencing awful things. And car C is what they look like after they've been through the care system a bit. They've been scrubbed up. They arrive shiny, clean, but what might be going on under the bonnet? We might have some challenges because you don't know how much alcohol was consumed by the child in uterus, how much domestic violence they experienced in uterus or later, what drugs they experienced in uterus, or the effect of being with somebody who is experiencing drugs. So again, think about that timeline. What if the child that you have actually has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder? Now, it's sometimes quite challenging to tell in the early stages and when the child is younger. Yes, you might get that the philtrum isn't there and the eyes are slightly smaller, and so there are some facial features. You might know that the head was slightly smaller at birth, and you might think, oh, well, that's okay. If those signs are there, excuse me, if those facial signs are there, you might think, yeah. If they're not, you might think, oh, well, that's okay, because, the child probably hasn't got any FASD or neurological effects by alcohol. Those facial features are, from memory, created between gestation, between about the 5 and 8 week mark, 5 and 7. That's when that part of the body is being formed. If the alcohol is consumed at 11 weeks, it's not going to show up as facial features. If mum goes out on a bender when the child is 13 weeks gestation, that alcohol goes into the child and affects what is the parts of the body that are being formed. And it's not simple. Some children and some women, it doesn't affect them massively, and others it does. But go down that timeline and think, what would it be like if actually this child does have FASD? And a few years down the line, you start thinking, God, they're rubbish at maths. They just don't seem to be able to do it. Is it that their executive functioning is they can't hold things in their long-term memory or the short-term memory? Might it be? And you could question. Because if it turns out that it is FASD and there is poor memory function that often shows up with maths, seems to be a big thing with FASD and maths, then you can help that child by putting in some structures and some ways of being and strategies for that child to help them with the challenge that they have. If you just keep hoping it will get better, it won't, and you are not empowering the child and giving them the tools that they need. One of the things about those cars, what are they going to be like on different journeys? What are they going to be like in Hockney's Mulholland Drive on the bottom left? What are they going to be like on a motorway? What are they going to be like if they've got to take that long winding road? What will it be like? And it may be that the long winding road takes a completely different format. So for some of our children, they can cope with things when they're not pressurized and not stressed, but they have a problem when the pressure is on. And if we go back to the car metaphor, what if the child actually has the equivalent of spark plugs that aren't working properly, the equivalent of holes in the exhaust? They've got various bits that aren't working properly. What impact will that have? Which takes us to a very high overview of a parenting model and why understanding your child's attachment needs are really important. If a secure child will need low structure, low nurture, low engagement, low challenge. They might do well with high challenge, but they don't need it. With other different types of attachment disorder, the child needs a different type of parenting. So a child with an avoidant attachment style needs high structure, needs high nurture, needs high engagement, low challenge. Can I just say, I think that the secure, I may have mistyped because I couldn't find my reference. No, it's okay. I couldn't find the reference when I was first looking for it, and I stumbled across it this morning, so I hastily knocked this slide up. If you have a child with disorganized attachment disorder, if they are acting out, if they're violent, they need high structure. If they're dissociated, then they need low. This is useful because it helps you understand your child better. One of the other things it does, in my opinion, is it helps understand why sometimes placing siblings together is not a good strategy. And there's a video that I've done about placing siblings together that might be useful. If you have 3 children with different profiles for attachment, they need different parenting. I had an avoidant, an ambivalent, and a disorganized. So people looking in from the outside did not understand why I appeared to treat the children differently sometimes, because some needed high structure and then they felt safe. They needed that boundary being held, be held, and then they felt safe. I remember somebody watching me, a friend, observing us and looking at me with contempt because I was treating one child so, in his eyes, badly. He didn't understand what was going on, and I at that time didn't have the words. I just knew this child really needed boundaries. The outside world can see things differently. So think about the sort of child that you have and what they may need. Our children are outliers. They are different in a variety of ways. They do not follow the normal way of doing things and the normal way of parenting, which is why we have to step back and be therapeutic parents. And just to kind of remind you about the secure and disorganized, this is many of you who've watched me will know that I talk about Tim, who is the traumatized infant maltreated, who has had a really tough start in life. And Tim is going to be the outlier in school, in many, many environments. Tim is the outlier, and we need to understand that, recognize it, and part of that is also managing our own expectations. Right, so the TheraPlay model, and this links to the slide, I put this in just as a general thing. Many of our children, high structure, high nurture, high engagement, low challenge. My approach, which is sort of the fab parent approach, is we have to think in three ways. We have to think about ourselves as adults, we have to think about the child, and we have to think about the interactions between the child and the adult. And one of the things that we often as parents do, and guilty as charged for a number of years, we think about the child and what the child needs, what the child is doing, what we want the child to do, and we don't necessarily look at ourselves hard and say, what do I need to do to change so that that arrow, the interaction between the child and the adult, can change. So that takes us, and the quote there, the space. That space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. That space is massively assisted by being able to self-regulate yourself and learn how to do self-regulation so that you can manage your child and yourself better. The Bruce Perry strategy. When something is going, and the phrase, really unregulated children in school will not learn, well, they won't learn anywhere if they are unregulated. So when there is an interaction and the child is, to use a technical term, off on one, the first thing you have to do, in my opinion, is regulate yourself. Ground, make sure you're grounded, feet on the floor. Notice your breathing, drop it from high breathing down to stomach breathing. Stomach breathe, stomach breathe. Keep your window of tolerance wide and open so that you can manage yourself. Then you can start helping to regulate the child. And that's going to be non-verbal, probably. It's going to be, It's going to be connecting. Oh, yeah. Then you can relate. Say, wow, feels like you're having a tough time. Later, when that child is calm, you can reason and you can say, it's not okay to hit ... It's not okay to. What do we need to do? Let's practice some breathing so that you can start controlling yourself. Did you notice that as you were getting unregulated, there was just that point where you could have gone, you were almost in the red zone and you pulled yourself back. And that's a skill that can be learnt. So taking us back, again, universal cycle of change. We have to look at ourselves and look at where we need to grow. I would recommend that you look at the long article that Chris Halbom has written, because it will give you much more detail, and I don't have the time to go in it now. Recognize when it's happening and what's happening. Now, I'm curious, I'm a learner, and when I first learned NLP back in 2002, one of the exercises that we did was a thing called the meta mirror. And you imagine a triangle on the floor, and you imagine the person in kind of the second circle. So there's 3 corners in the second corner. You stand in corner 1. Corner 2 is where the other person is. And corner 3 is the place of wisdom. So I stood in corner 1 and I looked at one of my children, imagined in front of me. And I saw this angry, this child. And then I shook that off. And then I stood in her shoes. And I stood like her. She's a lot shorter than me, so she had to look up. She was incredibly tense. So I took on that physiological. I stood in her shoes, metaphorically, physically, and boy, it was uncomfortable. Step out into stage 3, corner 3, the place of wisdom. And I realized, and the way I phrased it at the time was, she has turned me into her birth mother. Now, I would re-language that now into her behavior allowed me, I took that on. I became the angry person that on some level she kind of needed to be. And actually it was horrible. So what did I need to do? I needed to change. I needed to recognize that I was appearing very scary to her. You know, I'm 5'8" and a former PE teacher. I can throw my voice. I have a presence about me. And for her, that was terrifying. So I had to learn. I mean, God, that was hard. I went through all sorts of angst doing it. And that's one of the reasons I've continued studying NLP and many other modalities to learn how to do this. But it was awful. I realized that I had to change and grow. And that was hard. I don't say it wasn't, but it was necessary. It was important. And I am a much better person for doing that process and hundreds and hundreds of others. I'm including this wonderful book, Avoiding the Enemies of Happiness, written by Grant Suzalu. Much missed. He died last year, and I was fortunate enough to train with him in Australia and in Holland. And it's one of the things that I learnt to go and study with the best in whatever their field is. And his book, Avoiding the Enemies of Happiness, talks about, it combines NLP, positive psychology, a number of things. He was a man who studied, he was an engineer by training, had masters in all sorts of things, including kind of engineering approach. It's not just a, you know, fluffy, to use my phrase, the weird hippie shit. Yeah, the weird hippie shit works too, and you need the other stuff. And for managing expectations and how we feel about our lives, pleasure is just a bath or a piece of cake or something, and that's relatively quick and we savor it, and that's pleasure. Engagement, and I think that's a bit like a tweet. Engagement is when we start integrating coherent, we get in the flow of things. I think that's like a blog. And a meaning, that's where we connect to our wisdom and our purpose. And that's like writing a book. And understanding these things can help us manage the challenging children that we have. So I'm heading towards the end, and adoptive parenting is tough, and we can learn massively from it. I went to Australia partly to learn from Grant, and I spoke at a conference. I've delivered training on and off for a long time, but I spoke at a conference. You can see that, it's on the YouTube channel. But what an experience. I would never have had that if I hadn't been through adoption. I developed, grew. I went to Bali. This is a ceremony in Bali. I would not have had this experience had I not got my learnings from adoption. I went to the Antarctic, somewhere I'd always wanted to go, and had the privilege of seeing Lewis Pugh, the UN Ambassador for the Oceans, dive off that iceberg into icy water because he has a passion about the oceans. And yes, I saw lots of penguins. And the reason I'm dressed slightly bizarrely is I kayaked on the left-hand side. I kayaked in the Arctic. Now, yes, I kayaked when I was a lot younger, but the experience of having that, again, part of the learnings that I had, because adoption has taken me to places that I did not know existed. And I decided I would do that with the world. And so, yes, I went to the Amazon, I went to Peru, and in the Amazon, I got something rather nasty and ended up in intensive care in Mexico. And you know what? It was fine. I had people who looked after me. Yes, it was a big experience. And the skills that I learned along the way, the strengths that I developed, helped me do that. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to do all these wild, adventurous things, but it's finding your own things that bring you alive, that help you have a life that you can enjoy. I went to the Ukraine to film with Frank Puslik, who is a Vietnam veteran, who talks about how to help veterans overcome PTSD. I have a massive interest in trauma. I met him in America. He invited me to Ukraine. So I went, and then I went back again to film him. These are people that I have met along the way from whom I've learned a lot. Robert Dilt's one of my NLP trainers. I learned, I can't begin to thank him for how much I have got from him, from his material and him personally. And there are a couple of interviews with him on my YouTube channel about the logical levels and the impact of trauma on them. It was the model that changed my thinking beyond any other. And it was on my first day of NLP, when that model was presented, it was like being hit by a train. Absolutely changed my thinking. And when I realized that beliefs drive behavior. One of the things about upskilling ourselves is if we are not skilled enough in anything, it becomes anxious, it's difficult. If we get enough skills and we map the skill level across to the challenge, we can get into flow, which is why continuous learning, I think for everybody, but certainly for adopters, people parenting traumatized children, is so important. So what does it take to have a full and rich life? Courage, compassion, creativity, which are the bedrocks of MBIT, which is multiple brain integration techniques, which is the thing that I learnt with Grant Susalu. And for me, the things in blue, being real, absolutely essential. Reflective practice, being realistic about expectations, behavioral flexibility, and keep on learning. we've talked about this again, continuous learning feeds into the cycle of change. I have, there's an online training course for those of you that are interested. So the final little thing, and Fab Parents, which is my website, and again, going through throes of updating and changing. I'm about melting trauma, transformation, and future-proofing. So past, present, and future. Information here on about Fab Parents, and I hope you have found that to be useful. I do have the window of tolerance I've got on this slide, it seems. I'm not going to talk about it because I've talked about it elsewhere. Similarly, I'm not going to talk about this now. It's in the want to adopt, which, even though it says want to adopt, is very relevant for all stages of the process. And that chart, I think, is quite useful. So on that note, I am hopefully, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was fascinating as always. That was fabulous. Thank you. What a lot of things to consider, and you know, there was something there for everybody at every stage, I think. So fabulous, fabulous. Again, if I can just remind folks that if they want to ask a question, now is the time, if you haven't already, to fire something in the Q&A tab, which you will find at the bottom of your screen if you do a wee mousey wiggle. Hopefully we can get through the questions that come through. We have had one already. In fact, we've got a couple already. So Helen, if it's okay, I can just fire straight into this.
Yeah, you fire them.
I appreciate, obviously, that you don't know personal circumstances of these questions, so you can often just answer in generic terms, but that's always helpful. So I'll just read this straight out as verbatim. Even when my 11-year-old seems to be at the reason stage, he tells me to F off repeatedly and won't explore the incident. How should I respond? Should I continue to try and talk it through, or just leave it?
Goodness me, so much in one question, as ever.
It's a great first question. A great first question.
Well, as ever with working with traumatized children. Firstly, keep yourself resourced, and then inside your head start wondering, what is that about? One of the things that I think, forget is that inside every traumatized child who's telling you to F off, who is hitting you, who is maybe sunk into a dissociative frozen state, at their core, for all of them, there is a terrified child. Fear is the driver. Now, they wouldn't be able to verbalize it, they wouldn't be able to explain that, but trauma has, and their early experiences have caused this. So maybe stepping back and thinking, okay, what's going on? And sometimes it's with the children, it's things they've heard, it is a defense, and think about what their beliefs are. I would recommend that you look at certainly look at the last webinar that I did with Adoption UK, because some of that will be covered. I always think what we have to do is we have to step back, step back, step back. And often we can't work it out in the moment. We have to be reflective, and we have to think, when we step away from it and go, I wonder what the underlying cause was for that. What's going on at a deeper level? Then you can maybe plan what you do next time they tell you to fuck off. Ooh, sorry. But anyway, that's real. I mean, you know, they never say F off, and they call you all sorts of other things. I mean, the creative use of language that our children have when they are throwing abuse is really skillful, actually. I mean, I don't know, maybe you could point that out, but only at an appropriate time. And I think the caveat with all my answers is, you know your child best. And the more frameworks you've got for thinking, the more models you have, the more useful it is. If the only tool that you have is a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. That's a quote from Milton Erickson, the very famous hypnotherapist. So you need a massive toolkit. You know, you need a plumber's toolkit, an electrician's toolkit. You need the stuff to get to the spark plug. You need a wide range of tools. Some will be relevant at some time and others won't be. And it might be that you need a Phillips head screwdriver and all you've got is the straight one. Well, it's still a screwdriver, isn't it? Yeah, no. It's, if you're using a straight one, it's just not, it's not going to work. So step back and think about it from those perspectives. And also, if there's the potential for violence, step back. You don't want to make them a perpetrator. And what is the root cause? I think we have to do deep work with our kids to help them understand their past. Again, go back to the previous webinar. I'm not going to repeat myself now.
Yeah, that's great, Helen. Thank you very much. It's, you know, the bag of tricks, as we call it, sometimes is you know, it's a fantastic thing to kind of explore, and the beauty of webinars such as this and the ability to share your experiences with other adopted families is that other people have different experiences and different tricks and different techniques, and you know, it's because of course our children, being extraordinarily intelligent, they learn what we try and do to diffuse and you know, to help regulate, and you know, they will try and sabotage. So no, very wise words indeed.
Thank you. And just on that, they try and sabotage, and they try and sabotage because they believe themselves to be worthless.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes. So a couple of nice messages coming in on the chat. In response to your picture of Antarctica, we've got somebody on who used to live in the Falklands. So I don't know if maybe that was a step in post for you in order to get to the, no?
Not yet.
Not yet, not yet. Another message, somebody commenting on how much they loved your book, and it was the first book on their journey, and having a great time listening to you on the webinar today. So another question, we'll just fire into another question. So on the slide about child's attachment, what do you mean by structure for high, medium and low structure? Could you give some examples of what this may look like and how the different responses, and how for the different responses? Okay,
structure allows predictability. So we're having breakfast at 8. We then do, you know, we leave for school at 8:30. We get you there at 9 o'clock. We have a hug, or as we walk to school, we have a conversation. And having that structure so that it provides safety. So it might be that visual strategies are great. You stick things on the wall and this is what we do every day. Maybe this is what we do every week. So on Mondays, yes, we do swimming after school. And after that, we have a hot chocolate and a muffin. Keeping that structure there helps the child feel safe. Bedtime routines are a great way of doing it. So for it, you know, it's the nurturing and all of that, and keep that going. I mean, I ended up with 3 children. Well, I had 3 children, and I had one on either arm and the other sitting on the lap when I read stories, and then later on made up stories where they were allowed to pick an animal and a thing, and I would weave in this story. And it was a ritual at the end of the day, and they knew it was going to happen. It was a boundary. It was safe. The whole, if you are naturally a bit lackadaisical and you're an options person, no, you need routine and structure, because it's what they lacked in their birth family. It was chaos, and chaos is scary. So routines and structure is really important, and keep it simple. and keep it relatively minimal. That's very badly phrased. Keep it simple. Sorry, simple is a better word. Keep it simple, keep it visual. And it might be things like you put a note in the bathroom, the order that you do things, how you clean your teeth, what the order is, because it helps the child who very often may not have that executive functioning. Not sure if that fully answers it, but go and have a look. It's partly I think from memory, the TheraPlay model and adult attachment. I'm sorry, I couldn't find. I went through all the files looking for this yesterday, and it ended up being in a booklet that I knocked out a quick slide for earlier on today. So
no, that's fabulous. I think that answers the question.
Sorry,
well. And it's and you know, if it doesn't answer it comprehensively for the person that asked the question, it certainly points in a direction that they can find out more information. I mean, we often find things like visual cues are really useful for our families, you know, so we'll move on to another question. Just to I'm just conscious of time. That is midday. Are you okay, Helen?
Oh yeah, fine.
Yeah, there's another couple of questions coming in. I've actually got a question myself, which I don't know if I'm abusing my ability as host here to ask the question, but I'm going to anyway, about grief. So the role of grief, right at the very beginning of your presentation, you know, when you were talking about expectations and, you know, what you thought was going to happen and what you think is going to happen, the role of grief within that. And obviously, possibly. So I apologise to everybody. I've just broken the webinar, everyone.
No, I just want to. There is a grief model in Want to Adopt, which is different from the conventional grief model. Oh, it's typical, isn't it? I can't find it. Grief is absolutely huge. Our children have lost so much, and so have we. There is a grief model in Bubble Wrap Children, which is the find it for you. The Kubler-Ross model. I'm desperately trying to find it to hold it up to the screen. Oh, I think it's probably there. The Kubler-Ross model. Yeah, right. So, okay. That is the grief cycle as described by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the extended grief cycle. So those of you that want to take a snapshot of that page, you can. And I think grief is very relevant for our kids and for us. We've had losses, and grief is not just about people. I went for a bike ride yesterday, and I currently live in central London, and I've decided to move because the reasons I moved here are you know, for theatre, for seeing friends, for business, for connecting, and swimming. I have a pool close to where I live. I've lost all of those during lockdown. I've lost those because of COVID. And yesterday, and I've decided I'm going to move. And yesterday I was cycling and I popped into the Guards chapel. And I wandered around and there was music playing and it was all glorious. And I found myself teary. And I went, oh, that's really interesting. And it was partly the music, it was partly. And I also realised that I was grieving for the loss that I'd not yet had of leaving London because I didn't feel safe to stay there. So grief and loss comes in, it's lost expectations as well as lost people. It's the loss of a home that you loved. It might be the grief around a divorce. You might have wanted the divorce, and yet you've lost a variety of things because of that. So grief and loss touches so many parts of our lives. I would say much more than normal people. And triggers are there when they come as a surprise. So I don't know if that answers that question, but that's
it certainly puts meat on the bones of the question, certainly, and you know, I think grief was something that was never really acknowledged or talked about for quite a long time, and still isn't widely appreciated for the role that it has as adopters.
There is the model that I couldn't find in Want to Adopt, but that's there, is grief exhaustion. Can't remember a name off the top of my head, but if you Google grief exhaustion, there is a brilliant article. It'll pop up to the top because it's on Google. Look it up, and it's 5 stages. And when I first came across it, went, oh yeah, I've shared it with many people, and all of us have gone, oh yeah, wow, I can see the stage that I'm at. Again, 2 different grief models, both useful, and I'm sure there are more.
Fabulous, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, one other thing about models. It's really useful to share them with people and with kids, because it's like, well, there's a normality to it. It's, if you've got printed out, and I sometimes use the sort of psychoeducation trauma, things that are printed and then laminated. If it's laminated, you're obviously showing it and using it quite a lot. So it normalizes the experience. And for our children to know, well, it's not just me. Other people had this. Wow.
Yeah.
I think that is useful and helpful. Models, metaphors are great because they use left and right brain. So share some of this stuff with your kids so that they start realizing they're not broken, they're not damaged. They've had metaphorical shrapnel. They've had really tough experiences, and they are hurting. And it is possible to melt some of that. And no, it's not easy. And yes, it can be done. Fabulous,
thank you. Okay, so we have 2 questions left. And one of them, goodness me, okay, so.
Thank you, that's a pre-frame there.
It is, I'm sorry, yeah, and I apologize to the person who asked the question. It just is such a big question. Okay, so that's the second pre-frame. I really appreciate your honesty and truth. This is the person, me reading it out, not me. I really appreciate your honesty and truth, thank you. As prospective adopters, we are very open to and aware of the challenges and have been doing lots of research, learning, reflection. It's not that I want to bury my head in the sand at all, but we would like to know if there is anywhere we can see the other side of the coin to balance out the emotions we are feeling, i.e. the positive side to adoption. What does adoption bring that birth children don't in a positive way? I hope that makes sense. Well, yes. I think it makes perfect sense.
Yes, it does. I think I refer you to my travel slides. Yes, there are positive sides to adoption. We learn more about ourselves. The reason that the positive side of adoption, or sometimes people talk about all the negativity, is because they've not managed their expectations. So if, I'm going to use an extreme example. If you've got 2 people, I mean, you know, as my ex-husband and I were, you know, we both got degrees and whatever, professional people. If we held on to an expectation that our children would go to university, well, we expect that, and we didn't get it, then what happens when, for people like that, their children are diagnosed with a learning disability and they're struggling to read? And what does that make somebody do? And that can make it, well, you know, my kids are not doing what they want. And I've certainly come across adopters, and I recall one a lot older, you know, had children for a lot longer than I had. And they were stuck in the, well, you know, they should have gone to college, they should have gone to university. And actually in that instance, I'll change the facts slightly. In that instance, there was a child who was working in a leisure centre, who was a lifeguard, you know, holding down a job, earning money, wasn't massively on booze or drugs. I mean, results. So it's about you as to whether the experience is positive. Yes, you hear about the negative. I mean, it ain't fun standing in front of a front door at 2 a.m. in the morning when your child is trying to get out and buy drugs and you are choosing between letting them go and getting a punch in the face. Yes, that's difficult. Of course it is. That happens, and a lot of other things happen as well. Year or two down the line, when that child is actually holding down a job and comes up and says, you know what, Mum, I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without you, I reckon I'd be dead. That is priceless. We earn our gratitude. We earn our level of satisfaction and pride in a way that, because our kids are the outliers and we are the outliers, other people don't get. Give you an example. Most of my friends now are adopters or involved in the trauma world or whatever. I've only got one friend left from primary school days, and she gets it. And when we get together, and we have done obviously over many years, she says, right, I'm going to tell you my news first because yours always outdoes mine. And her kids, you know, one went to Oxford. And it's that wonderful humour. So I then tell my stories, which are, you know, got some issues and blah, 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 blah. That's the difference. So if that answers the questions, and that's where the managing of expectations, the universal cycle of change, what do you expect? What do you want? If you are a keen footballer and you want your kids to play football, if they spent a long time strapped in a buggy, their legs ain't going to work so well. So they may play football, but just not terribly well. And you can understand, if you can understand that, it will make your level of satisfaction as a parent be completely different. And do not compare yourselves with the Karens or the whoever's, the normal parents in the playground. They won't understand what's going on for you, and you just got to go, yeah, whatever.
That's a lovely sentiments at the end there, particularly, you know, about expectations and managing your expectations and dreams, and being echoed by one of my colleagues from Scotland, actually, who's just fired something into the chat, and something that she added in there as well is about surrounding yourself with people who get it, which will help with your final comment there about surrounding yourself with, you know, yeah. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the very final question then, Helen, for this session is what would you recommend reading to enable people to work out their own and their child's attachment, preference and style?
Do you know, off the top of my head, I don't know. There may be people here who could put some of that up. So the answer, I mean, there are adult attachment questionnaires. There's the MIMS and I can't remember. Depending on the stage that you're at, you might want to, if you could talk to your social worker. I mean, again, Google it. Explore that and recognize that we all have different, you know, we all have different attachment styles. And some of us as adopters, we didn't start life as securely attached. I mean, certainly for me, when I started learning this stuff, and I make reference to it in Want to Adopt, I realized what my parenting had been like and what deficits there were in it and what the consequences were to me. So again, that's part of my learning. And when I know how I behave in certain situations, and it's linked to my attachment style. So it is useful to know that, because it helps you understand some of those buttons that the kids find and press And in the old, there's apparently an Alcoholics Anonymous phrase, which is, why is it that my mum can press all my buttons? And the answer, because she installed them. So we all have our own buttons that have been installed, and our kids will find buttons that we didn't even know, which is why the self-development, the learning, the progressing is so important. And also, I would say, staying in touch with other parents throughout the journey. There is a tendency for some adopters to get their kids and after a couple of years go, well, we don't need adoption stuff anymore. And then they come on their hands and knees back into the different parts of the adoption community when their children are older. Stay connected, keep learning, always, always, always. So, yeah.
No, fantastic. Thank you. I think you have to be kind to yourself as well and acknowledge that you're going to get it wrong. You know, and continue to get it wrong for a very long time, probably.
Yeah. And one of the things about attachment is that when things go wrong, the breaking of the connection, it's not the breaking of the connection so much as the need to reconnect. And attachment is all about breaking the connection, re-engaging, breaking, re-engaging, breaking, re-engaging. So that's part of it. I have, Brené Brown is somebody that many of you may know. She's got some great TED Talks. She talks about shame and vulnerability. She's a researcher, nothing to do with adoption or anything. I have been reading Daring Greatly over the last week or so and highlighted, scribbled over the book. It is a great book to learn about self, others, and giving you some tools to dig, if that's another sort of helpful resource. Because I think just staying within the adoption, fostering, trauma world, it's not useful. I found material in that book that I will quote in my next book, without doubt.
Fabulous, thank you. And another great couple of tips there as well, to broaden people's reading and information and bag of tricks that they can employ in their families. I mean, that's just fantastic. I think we've kind of reached the end, actually, Helen. There isn't any more questions coming in. I'm going to inflict my image on everybody again, and just to you know, a few messages coming into the chats just saying thank you, fantastic, wonderful. Somebody had asked about slides, Helen, but I'm guessing that
okay, sorry, yeah, two things. If you can, Simon, if you can take a copy of the chat, because I can't see it, and I know it goes up on the screen, and it also means that people's names come up, so there's that confidentiality element to it. As far as slides are concerned, I will put the slides up on SlideShare that's linked with LinkedIn, and I've got, and again, it's Helen Oakwater. I mean, I created my surname, so it's unique, which is very useful. This is way before social.
It's very Tolkien-esque in some respect.
Thank you. Well, it kind of oak and water, just, I have an oak tree that lives in my head and I'm very much related. So it's that.
There's a book in there, I think, somewhere.
There's all sorts of things in there. So I will put those slides up. I know that you'll make the webinar available to members, and also I will have a copy and I will put that on my YouTube channel. So
so plenty of ways for it to become available to everybody. My colleague Claire, who initially set up this, will probably deal with a lot of those aspects. But
and I was going to ask, can you, Simon? There is a way of recording and the chats so that I can have a look at them afterwards, please.
Yeah. So not to get too much into the technical detail, this is Adoption UK's Zoom account, which I can only access to start and do hosty kind of things. The actual recorded elements of it, including the chat, will be accessible to Claire, who normally hosts these things. So I'll maybe just drop Claire, although I think she's on holiday at the moment, a wee message. So there might be a wee delay before you get that, Helen, and before it's
That's
made available.
absolutely fine.
But yeah, it will
Well,
be.
Simon, thank you for hosting me, and thank you everybody.
Thank you.
I'm seeing little flashes coming up. Thank you to the.
Yes, no, absolutely lovely. Yes, lots of very positive things there. I feel sorry for the person frantically writing it all down. So much information, Helen. Thank you again. Thank you for joining Adoption UK this morning, this Monday morning. Some people, it's a bank holiday in some places in the UK, I believe, which caught me completely by surprise. So I don't know what's going on these days, to be honest with you. Apparently it's Monday, but I'm not too sure about that either. But thank you again. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And Helen, I hope we have the opportunity to work together again soon.
I would be delighted.
Fabulous.
Adoption UK is very close to my heart for very obvious reasons.
Yes, well, indeed. Well, it would be great for you to come up and, not physically at the moment, but it'd be great for you to come up and do something in Scotland along a similar line. That would be grand.
Be delighted to, Simon.
Fabulous. Well, you're recorded now, so I'm afraid you can't go back on that. So, Helen, I'm going to end it now, but thank you, everybody. Again, positive messages coming into the chat. Thank you all, and see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
That obligatory Zoom wave of the hands.